This is a short film about those grubby looking people who spend their time shouting in the street about 0-hour contracts or the rights of workers or women's rights or protesting against wars and imperialism. I myself have been part of hundreds of campaigns over the years, but one thing for me stands out at tying these campaigns together. We protest for the right to self-determine and self-define what people may do with their own bodies. This can be how people work, where or why they work, who they can marry or even have sex with. We demand the right that our actions, our bodies, are understood by others on our own terms. Where bodies can go, where they can stay, what people call themselves must be recognised. Power over the body, where people may spend their time, what they do when they sell their labour, is a cornerstone of the exertion of power in the capitalist system. Equally, other than the bodily fallout of capitalism in purely economic terms, is the construction and definition of bodies socially and how they are represented. The activist gives over a huge section of their lives, their time and the spaces that they occupy, to use their own body in defiance of systems of oppression and power. This film tries to explore what it means to rebel, to protest and to march together with other workers or with members of a community tied together by some construct of oppression. What it means to put one's body in the way of power in our society. Language, the communicable paradigm where meaning is presented and challenged, is another battleground for power and for self-determination of our own existence. The individual's existence is labelled, is signified in a language that is not neutral and does not exist in a vacuum distinct from social and cultural exertions of power by states and systems of being. This film really looks at those people who seek to challenge power through deeds and through words.
Johnson. Currently I'm one of the BME officers at the University of Manchester Students' Union. Just recently been elected the Campaigns and Citizenship Officer full-time for the next year. I am involved in Manchester Labour Students, where I'm the treasurer. I'm the one of the BAME officer job share for Momentum Youth and Students nationally. I'm on the Black Students Committee as the Mature Students Rep, again as a job share. I've been involved in anti-war and anti-austerity movements for as long as I knew how to join a lot of things. Yeah. What else? I'm just general, rent a brown lefty, really.
So my name's Emma. And so I was majority involved in the Socialist Party and by extension the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, which led to campaigns predominantly around the cuts of recent governments, which was keep the NHS public and reclaim the night, and also the arc that was under the bridge on Oxford Road because of the homelessness issue that is particularly prevalent in Manchester.
I'm Jana, and I'm not directly involved with anything politically at the moment, but been a Labour Party member and a Socialist Party member, and sort of taken part in lots of little local campaigns and things like that through the lens of that sort of. Yes.
My name's Connor Price. I'm a current member of the Labour Party. I've been involved with the Youth Fight for Jobs, which is a fight for decent paying conditions for workers, especially in fast food industry, precarious industry, people on 0 hours contracts and that kind of thing. And a few other campaigns as well. I've got less time than I used to, so not as many as I used to.
And of course, trade union, are you allowed to say that sort of stuff? Or?
Yeah, I'm a member of the RMT trade union. Before, I used to work for the civil service. I can say this, I don't work for the civil service. in the PCS trade union, which is a union for civil servants.
To give my age away too much, when I was when I was 18 months, I went on my first march. That was in support of the miners. During the early 80s, early to mid 80s. I came from a very political family. We were we're in the Labour Party, we're in the Anti-Nazi League, we're in trade unions. So that was always a thing. So that was my political consciousness had always been around. I suppose though, if I'm completely honest, the thing which really got me and made me feel like I didn't have a choice was I'm from Oldham, and in 2001 we had what has been characterised as race riots. Young black lads, young Asian lads, and young white lads fighting on the streets, petrol bombing each other, stabbing people randomly, and as a mixed race lad whose grandparents, both my black and white grandparents lived or have lived in what are now predominantly Asian communities. So I was my existence was political in that sense, and there was fear, there was anger, there was I was at the sharp end of things. My town had always been, as long as I could remember, there had been a problem with race in Oldham, and it came to a point where it was right. I do something about this, or I don't know what my existence is, and to a thing of, not to sound like a martyr, it's trying to be a voice to people who didn't have that voice themselves. When you're seeing old Bengali and Pakistani men and women in the 70s and 80s who'd come to this country on a promise to come back to the motherland, and they were having the crap beaten out of them by racists whose only interest was to subjugate and to put fear. I couldn't have that. But at the same time, coming from a relatively working class white family, which is a big part of my family, as mixed race, so as a thing, mixed race people and tend to be racialized as the melanin, but I'm as white as I am black, and I could see clearly the frustrations of for want of a better word, the native white community, in that our schools were terrible, the social care was terrible, housing was terrible, because of the socioeconomic positions that the town was in. Everyone was being screwed over, and it felt like certain people in power were playing it to be black and white, when it was actually, let's have a look at them.
I guess really it was the stuff that, post 2008 and the crash there, and the fact that things were getting more and more heated, and I was just becoming more and more aware of this it was like a vague injustice that was sort of starting to pervade everything. And then with the 2011 riots, there was 2010 Millbank, which sort of brought protest into my sort of radar, which hadn't really been a thing before. There was 2010 Millbank, and then there was the 2011 riots, and that's when sort of I started paying a lot more attention to this stuff, really, because I'd always been, because I was a chef for a long time, and there was always this kind of you kind of look after your own. It's like a mini union, very tiny union, a very corrupt tiny union. But so I'd always sort of been aware of that kind of sticking up for your rights at work and things like that, and sort of making sure you get what's owed you, and it sort of expanded out through that, and I kind of became more aware of the kind of the wider picture and stuff like that, and yeah.
The trigger point sort of came in when the tuition fees got raised to £9,000, because I think I was around 16 at the time, so I wasn't even old enough to vote for a change that then ended up affecting me, and currently is still affecting me in a way that it was decided by people that, I mean, at 18, they're only just going to uni. The majority of the voting population were all past the age of being at university. Didn't affect them. The politicians that brought it in had been to university and hadn't paid a penny, but they were forcing me into a situation that I didn't have a say in.
I think one of the things that first got me politically conscious was when I came up to university 5-6 years ago, up to Manchester, and seeing the amount of homeless people that there are in the city. You know, and you're going around, you're seeing all of these homeless people, but there's a lot of money in the city. There's lots of new housing developments going up. If you go further out from the city centre, there's lots of empty houses as well. You see all of these people in dire need of housing, but it's not being provided. So there's something going wrong there, and that's what started me on the path of being a socialist, basically.
I discovered racism in reception at primary school, where I was told in no uncertain terms that I was a Paki. Geography is not a racist strong point. And like that was something that I was always, that you were always aware. So from, and this is, for the white racist, if you had melanin and you lived in Oldham, you were a Paki. For their dads, for their uncles, for their mums, you might be a coon, but you were mainly a Paki. But then within the black community, as is, if you're Afro-Caribbean in any way, shape or form, you were black. And although like the black community does have things of you're Barbadian, you're Jamaican, you're Nigerian, you're Somali, when it was in that town where it was a thing, it was basically find a way of existing, then you're black.
I suppose when I was in high school, I would be labelled as a slut or a whore quite a lot for just wearing something slightly shorter than planned or something low cut. I got called Meg for about 6 years from Family Guy because I wore glasses and looked a bit like Meg from Family Guy. I got Ugly Betty quite a lot because I wore braces as well. Really top-notch high school adolescent terms for you. And I suppose the last relationship I was in, I got branded by the guy I was with as a slut as well, just if I ever had male friends. And when it's someone that you're in a relationship with, you do start to consider that of yourself, because this is meant to be someone that you trust, someone that knows you better than anyone else. To brand you as a slut as well, you do start internalising it.
Well, possibly I am labelled, but it's never done me any harm. I've never not been given a job because I'm white or a man. You know, that doesn't happen. Even though that does exist in the fantasies of most of Middle England and the Daily Mail, it simply doesn't happen. I can say that now to you. It's not a barrier to anything. It is privilege.
People at bus stops, because people think they can just talk to me, they can just strike up a conversation with me, and because it's like the most immediately obvious thing about me, it will always be about that with a stranger, you know, or well, it will always be about that with somebody who maybe means less than well, you know. So somebody at a bus stop who's just chatting, and it's not always kind of malicious, I guess, but it is that kind of, it is violent in the sense that we're talking about now. It is the imposition of an identity onto me because of what they perceive and how that lines up with what they already know, I guess. But yeah, people often sort of, you know, I get transvestite, I'm a cross-dresser and things like that because I don't pass terribly well or whatever. But like, it's strange that people will assume that the knowledge that they have is complete, I guess, and and just sort of impose that model onto people they've never met, know nothing about. I guess to me that seems very odd, but then it maybe shouldn't, because there's times in my life when that's been what I did, and there's certainly in the past, but I mean there still are, really, and it's one of those things where, like, I guess, to go back to the first question you asked, I suppose, it was about who labels, who gets to label, and that is it'll always be the dominant societal group, for want of a better term, the sort of, I mean, you white, cisgendered, straight males, basically, to tick off all the boxes. And these are the people who are at the top of this pyramid, and then, you know, certain other people, white women and things like that, and you just sort of slide down until you get to the absolute bottom, basically, which is sort of trans women of colour, probably, fortunately.
It shapes absolutely everything. It shapes the way people think about it. It's a foundation of false consciousness, is not calling things what they are. You know, it's when they have all of these terrorist attacks by white supremacists. They say it was like that Anders Breivik. It was a loner, wasn't it, who did it? And he was just a madman, and he went and blew these things up. But it's terrorism at the end of the day. He was a terrorist, but they're not saying he's a terrorist because he was a white man.
Last week, the spice epidemic was just declared an epidemic in Manchester because of its availability. But homelessness hasn't been declared an epidemic, despite the fact there's a clear link between levels of spice and levels of homelessness, because they're taking it, according to sort of documentaries, to forget the position they're in. So how can you declare one a crisis but not another? You can create cuts to homeless but then declare that the drug's a problem, when there's hundreds of spaces all across Manchester where there's either land that's not been built on, buildings that have been built but no one's taken it over, particularly in Ardwick, where you could house probably half of the people in the city centre easily, but they're not using it. Also, when squatting was made illegal as well, that means you can't actually enter that. And then there was a case in the city centre a couple of months ago where people have actually died because there was a fire in a building that they were occupying for warmth in the depth of winter. That they're not being, what they're being criticised for is being there even though they've lost their lives. It's like they're not considered people, they're not considered a group at all because they've not got that roof over their head. And yeah, and if you speak to many of them, I could get a job, I have the qualifications, but I'm not considered a person until I've got a roof and an address or even a bank account to have my wage paid into.
There's a lot of people sort of reject labels wholesale and say, you know, labels are for leftover pasta or something equally stupid. But like, labels to me are quite useful. I need labels. Like, my relationship with my body and my mind, for that matter, is quite complicated and difficult to put across quickly. So labels, I guess, are sort of they're like little shorthands. They're like little agreed upon. Well, they're supposed to be agreed upon. That's another thing. Whether they actually are agreed upon is another area, I guess. But I have labels like I'm a trans woman, which is quick and easy to say, rather than, well, I'm actually sort of, I'm not sure I have a gender identity as such, but my expression is femme, and then like it just gets very complicated and people start dropping off, basically. So I quite like labels in that it's something you can quickly convey complicated ideas with. But then, as I sort of said before, there's that confusion over whether two people mean the same thing by this label. And you can kind of say that about any word if you get deep enough into it, can't you?
There's a quote by, I think it's Guy Debord, it's the Situationist anyway. They're talking about, what is a single day of bloody revolution compared to a week of, normality. Every day we see structural violence. You see people, going back to my earlier theme, people sleeping on the street without housing that already exists. That's structural violence. You see hate crimes that go on in this country. That's structural violence, but you don't even see it in the news anymore. It's not newsworthy. It's not considered newsworthy that these things happen, unless it's a particularly abhorrent case. The burning down of the camps in Calais and bulldozing of these things, that's structural violence, but it's just viewed as normal. In this country, we have a concentration camp called Yarl's Woods. They keep children in there, women in there, immigrants. Call it what it is, it's a concentration camp, but they don't call it that, it's a detention camp or whatever, That's structural violence, the way they cloak what something is with different words. It's a very neoliberal thing of putting a nice, friendly sheen on what something that is incredibly dangerous and incredibly oppressive as well.
Being a mixed race, socialist, Muslim convert from the north, I'm in a lot of communities. I joke, but when I go, because of my political positions and because of things which I have to do, I'm in London quite a lot. And in London, I am definitely a northerner, because that is a core thing. It's like you define yourself in relation to. I was going to say in relation to power, but yeah, we could say we do define ourselves in relation to Birmingham.
I work for Manchester United, and there's 3 of us there that are from Leeds. So the 3 of us are sort of a community of Leeds, but then there is an on-running joke between us that if you date a Mancunian, you are now a Mancunian, and Leeds sort of loses in the battle. And it's this sense of when I'm in Leeds, I'm part of the community of being from Yorkshire, and then when I go to Manchester, everyone's trying to convince me I'm a Mancunian, and I basically am one now. But as soon as a southerner comes in, you're in a good northern community there. And politics, I think, gives you that community as well. When we've done events like Reclaim the Night, I've never massively felt comfortable in a community of women only. They're very much wanting to have a self-defining women's only block when they do events like that, and I don't ever feel in part of that community, because the community is people who share your experiences and share your opinions.
Either through policy, and there were a lot of councils which had a policy of certain racial groups of immigrants could only live in certain areas. And you came to places, my dad didn't choose Oldham randomly, he chose Oldham because there were already some Bajans there. And you're put in this place where you've got to try and find a community. And at the same time, you come over thinking that you are British, and you're thinking that because that has been the narrative which has been pushed on you for 200 plus years of the sun doesn't set on the British Empire, England is the mother country. Come over here, help rebuild our country, help rebuild your country. You're put in these in generally poor conditions. No matter what your qualifications are, you're only going to be allowed to get, for want of a better term, menial jobs. There's few people who, a lot of our mums and aunties became nurses, but a lot of our dads and uncles worked in factory, or became taxi drivers, or bus drivers, or would do whatever they could do cash in hand. in this alien country where you get racialized and talked about as lesser wherever you go, and so you do become like, you do retreat into your community where you're not gonna face that. And I think it kind of relates to a conversation I was having with somebody a few days ago, where like our dad's generations, our parent generations, are coming close to retirement or are at retirement, and it goes to a thing of like, not that I'm pro-segregation, but we're going to a nursing home, and you're gonna be looking around, and if it's from if you've experienced from certain people racist like crap all the time, and that's been your experience, so you retreated within your community,
and then to have to move to a home
which is full of these people,
full of old racist white people.
yeah, and then what does that do, and what does that do psychologically? Like, I'm sure like if Frantz Fanon was still around, he'd have some really interesting stuff to say about that, and yeah, so yeah, like, and because power plays out in so many sort of ways, like it can be, okay, so like my dad needs a hearing aid, but the flesh-coloured hearing aid is pink, and like when he goes to hospital and he wants something to eat, and you know, there's nothing when you're under the weather and you want like, food is a big thing, and you can only have like bland British food, and it's like because that is normal. And I think that's the thing where like power plays in, and I think it's the thing about like community as well, because like we as people from the diaspora are very good at finding our ways to adapt and to find our ways to like to make our little bits like our home or the places that we go suit us and fit us, and make it so you can pretend for a little bit that you don't have to face this. At school, at high school, I went to an overwhelmingly white working class high school, which did have problems with racism. And to a large extent, the black people, the Pakistanis, the Bengalis, the Chinese, the couple Brazilians, the general like assorted Asian people that we had, we'd come together and we didn't really have a label for what we were, but as somebody who's studied sociology and has become more aware, it's like we were the racialized group.
Well, I think a community doesn't have a set of desired aims. So I would say with an organisation, you're aiming towards something. A community is just, in my opinion, a group of people who happen to be living somewhere a lot of the time. Whereas an organisation, even if it's like a large corporation or a government department, there's an aim there for that organisation. And in an organisation, obviously, not everyone's in it voluntarily, or maybe people are in it and they possibly think they're voluntarily in an organisation, you know. But an organisation is aiming towards a particular point that you're trying to get to, especially a political organisation, I would say.
Your personal relationship with somebody might be dreadful, but they're kind of one of your own. There's, especially in catering, there's very, not that it's always the best thing, but there's very sort of sides. There's front of house, there's kitchen, and never the twain shall meet, and that kind of, you know, and you stick up for kitchen even if they're knobs, you know, and they all were as well, but you stick up for them anyway, and it's like, yeah, because then they look after you as well, even if they hate your guts. Think you're a little queer prick. Can you leave that in? I don't know.
Yeah, I guess.
While society has those who have and those who don't, and those with power and those without, that level of community and that level of identity is important, and it plays a role, and we shouldn't let one aspect of us take over us, because we are all intersectional human beings. Like I'm a mixed race, Bajan, northerner, Liverpool supporting disabled person, Muslim. All these things all these things play out, but it's like acknowledging that, and there is strength in that, but also at the same time, we can't allow any of our separate identities to dominate, because we run a risk of the whole divide and rule thing, which those in power love. My uncle died because he had a brain tumor, which hemorrhaged, and he didn't get the care that he needed because he was a crazy black man complaining, and was literally sent away from hospital. Now, if that was like my mum's white and she passes as middle class because she was a teacher for a while. If that was my mum, if my mum had gone into hospital complaining with the same things that my uncle did, my mum would be alive. There's no question about it, because she'd have been treated early. She'd have been gotten. What would be seen now in this context is preferential treatment, but it's not preferential treatment. It's being treated like a decent human being, and it doesn't. There's a song by Q-Tip which essentially the root of the song is, no matter how rich you are, you can't buy yourself out of your race. And so if my step uncle, who lives in France, middle class white guy, votes UKIP and is a supporter of Le Pen and Front National over there because he hates these immigrants. And that's and that's fucking privilege. That's being able to go like so my mate, a random story, but my mate runs a t-shirt company, and one of the things that she does is one of the things that she produces this like tote bag which says, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man, and it's like you can do whatever because you know the world is set out for you, and if you have economic capital and the privilege of white skin, and not extraordinary levels of education, but like decent education, you can navigate places without thinking that I know that no matter how well I do in my career, how well I do at university, no matter what I do, I will, if I'm even allowed in these places, I will always be aware that this is a very strange thing that I'm in this place. That generation who came over in the 50s, 60s, early 70s, they largely discovered they were black once they got here.
When I was a child, my dad stayed at home with us a lot because just for the sheer fact that my mum earned more and she got sick of raising two kids and needed a little bit of a break from us. And my dad wasn't allowed to take me into the baby changing rooms because he was a man. And they're like, is this definitely your father? And I didn't have the wit at about 4 years old to say, oh, I hope so. I thought it was the milkman. And it was this judgment that a stranger who was like, oh no, why don't I take her in to the women's toilets? My dad being like, well, you're a stranger. Why would I raise my daughter to not talk to strangers, to not go off with strange people, but then also I somehow can't look after her? Here you go, take her.
Yes, I have been. I've been jumped and stuff like that. I mean, I was jumped before I sort of came out and things like that as well, but this was very definitely about me being trans, and I was just walking in. I was a bit pissed as well, and I was just walking in a weird bit of town that I wouldn't normally walk at a rather late hour that I wouldn't normally walk it, and yeah, somebody just shouted something, and because I was a bit half cut, I shouted back, and I shouldn't have. Should have just kept my head down and carried on walking. But then, you know, somebody's trying to oust me out of their space, so I wasn't going to have it. But then they just sort of leathered me a little bit.
Okay, so the two big times when I was attacked, I basically was saved by Pakistani or Bengali lads, and I remember hearing from them, like, I was a brother, and it was, and what I took for the meaning from that was, and this was like, I've subsequently taken Shahada and like converted to Islam, but like before then it was, you're somebody who experiences what we're experiencing, and so you are a brother or you are a sister.
People who might not have things in common, but have common goals, I guess, who realise that there is a common goal that they're able to work together towards, whether they agree on everything or not, whether they sort of disagree on major stuff possibly, but that it's possible to work together towards this singular goal. I guess that would be a sort of a fundamental definition of organisation for me.
See, the best way to obtain power is by the term you used earlier, and it's a term that's not used very often, or not as often as it should be, is solidarity. Solidarity between the working people of the world. That's how you obtain political power and change things for the better.
When you go into a Keep Bar NHS public picket, you're all there for the same reason, and it's almost like your actual political party or background surpasses you to an extent. I mean, there's no Tories on the Keep NHS public picket lines. You're pretty much solid with a load of lefties, but you're there for such a reason that you've got the power, and people respond to you because the NHS is such a high-profile subject.
Whilst being racialised by a group in power is rarely, if ever, a positive thing, I know that there is some strength in that. There's, like, when I go to NUS Black Students Conference, for example, I don't need to talk about, okay, so if I'm talking about a racist incident which happened at uni, or the fact that out of 14,000 lecturers in this country, only 17 are black women, I can have that conversation in these spaces, and I don't need to give context over why this is a problem. It's like, these people understand. And similarly, like when I was living in Scotland, when I was living in Glasgow especially, and I would see the struggle of the working class people, and I would be going through that because as a working class person, I could talk to working class Glaswegians about my politics when it comes to like socialism, when it comes to that, things like that, when it comes to when it comes to organising against the bosses, and they understand.
When I went to university, it was that initial feeling when I was put in halls of residence I couldn't afford, with people far better well off than me with better backgrounds, and suddenly there's me that have gone in bitter, I suppose, and cynical about my place in the world, to suddenly be put in a group of people that have no idea what that feels like. I suppose it's not powerlessness as feeling alone and isolated, because there's no way you can interact on the same level as some people.
Students coming out onto the picket line with lecturers, support staff, anyone who's directly employed by the university is the most important thing a student can do at university. That's where you get your political education, and that's where you learn the kind of stuff that people have to deal with in the workplace, the machinations that go on, the way that they will sack people completely in contravention of all agreements, like has happened at Salford University recently, and I believe that's still ongoing. I think perhaps it is, going back to what I said about the Stop the War thing, is protests isolated on their own aren't of much use, but when they're linked up with a wider struggle, say if there was a general strike, that would have possibly stopped the Iraq War in its tracks. And the same thing with the university. So lecturers going out on strike, support staff going out on strike.
If there is racial oppression, if there is homophobic oppression, if there is transphobic oppression, if there is like sexist-based oppression, then the people who are subject to that need to be taking the lead, or need to be platformed to say, this is what this actually means to us. But it is the duty of all of us who recognise oppression, because we all can. Well, if you're a decent human being, you can. Then you go, I need to lend my support. If you've been subjected to institutional hate by the state or by interpersonal relations, then if that's because you're disabled, if that's because you're LGBT, if that's because you're a woman, if that's because you are working class, then whilst I can't feel for exactly how you feel, I know what that's about, and I'm going to be in your corner.
Especially when it comes down to things like, the major intersections of things like gender and things like race and things like that, where you will only have probably one lived experience, and you won't share it always with everybody within a group. So I guess, in that sense, that's very much about solidarity. It's very much about accepting somebody else's truth, that you can never fact check it. You could never prove it to be wrong or right. You just have to accept it at face value, and maybe hopefully learn as well. Maybe take that on in some empathetic way. But yeah, I guess solidarity and empathy are quite close together. Solidarity is kind of empathy with purpose, I guess, in a way. Yeah.
People should be vigilant about what's going on in their social and their economic life, so at work and socially as well. Seeing if people are being marginalised for whatever reason, and if you think something is being done wrong, someone who is a person of colour, or LGBTQI, something like that, you need to stand up, even if you're arguing with your mate who you've known for 15 years or so, and they're being homophobic, sexist, and so on. That on a micro scale, it's that little act of solidarity that helps to change it as well.
Okay, so I believe in a world where we don't need to have BME officers and BAME officers. I don't think that's a world that we're in. I think that in a place where people are racialised, are put down because of their gender, their sexuality, their disability, or whatever, making sure that you've got somebody there is who can specifically fight on that issue. That is important. But only having that is counterproductive. And it's tokenistic, and frankly, it's bollocks. It's like if you want an organisation which is liberated, then you need to be able to achieve. You need to be in a position. You need to be able to aspire to any position within that organisation, and that organisation's goal needs to not be some liberal thing of like tweaking around the edges of the status quo to make things better. It needs to be because there is a need of a BAME officer or a BME officer or a black students officer, then there is inherently a problem, and so we need to start remaking that system, remaking that organisation, and looking at society and trying and like essentially rebuilding that in its entirety.
Well, I think a protest is a way of showing discontent, that people are upset about a certain state of things. It's a way of, I think also protests can be used as a safety valve. Some protests, like the Stop the War campaign, where people were being marched from A to B, putting Liberal Democrats on the platform, that kind of thing. It was used as a valve to diffuse the situation. But protests should be highlighting an issue. You should be visible there, with your propaganda, your leaflets, your placards. You're there speaking to people, raising awareness. But a protest is only a means to an end. It's not the end game of any strategy. It never should be, but it is sometimes. That's been used by certain organisations as well. So, like for example, in a strike, the workers are trying to win concessions from the bosses. You'd have a demonstration to raise awareness of what's happening, but the real fight is always going to be the strike. That's the one that poses the question of political power, rather than the protest itself. I mean, I don't know where you draw the line between a protest and like an uprising, a revolution, and that kind of thing. Protest to me, that's quite a small scale thing. Often
a protest is an act that sort of transgresses the corrals, the boundaries that I talked about before. There's the sort of the trackways that we're supposed to occupy, and a protest is anything that transgresses those. Probably something that transgresses those on purpose, with knowledge of with an intention to transgress, I guess. And anything that meets that definition will qualify as a protest.
I suppose it's getting together. It starts to an extent, group of mates in the pub, and you start talking about a situation or a politics, or say the fact that we've just called for another general election, and then it's an extension of, oh well, we all agree, well why don't we do something about it, and then oh well, this campaign's going on, or this party has this idea, and suddenly the group of people that are in the pub are actually marching down the streets of Manchester with 100,000 other people because the Tories have decided to have their conference in one of the strongest leftist strongholds of the country. And it's that development through discussion to mobilising to, I suppose, still using the old traditional techniques of a picket line or a march, or having your placard up there at 6 o'clock in the morning to make sure that the people that are coming know exactly how you feel about it.
Protest in itself is empowering. Like if you you're involved in something and you get a couple dozen mates on side and go, oh, we all think like this, and then that goes to a few hundred people on side. It's like, oh, we're doing something, and people pick up on it, and you have thousands of people out. Like I remember, helping to organise the Black Lives Matter march in Manchester, and with 3 days' notice, we ended up getting close to 5,000 people marching from Moss Side to the town hall. as an act in itself, is empowering to the community, which says we all are experiencing this, and we can do something about it.
If you look at the 70s, the Ford Dagenham workers got equal pay for women through a matter of protest to say we are skilled workers. When the Tories came to Manchester, that protest didn't change their position of actually running their campaign or their conference in Manchester, but it achieved change in a sense of the political cloud over Manchester started getting a bit more solidarity. People met each other, campaigns were brought from it, and it was that realisation that change can come from you realising you're not alone.
Well, I've been on lots of protests called by the National Union of Students, so-called National Union of Students, where it did seem to be a march from A to B. Nothing much was particularly done. There was never any clear demands, just to protest against the fees rising, but not what we would do to stop it. And I think there was a few years ago the prospect of linking up the protest against fees with the workers in UCU, which is the University College Union for the lecturers and other people like that, of linking together, but that didn't happen because of issues on both sides, I believe. But that could have really, if these things had worked together, it's a question of leadership, I think, with a lot of these.
When I first started chefing, I worked at a Cafe Rouge, where everything's like boil in the bag shit. It's like Weatherspoons, that kind of fling it out. And we were just really poorly treated, as you are in any kitchen, but it was like, we didn't have a head chef, and the manager was like running the kitchen, and she was the front of house manager in the whole restaurant, but she didn't know the first thing about the kitchen. And she was quite nasty and quite vindictive, and like, she was going after our KP, our pot wash, Zibi, who was Hungarian, I think, if I remember rightly, and he didn't have a lot of English, and you know, he was kind of, he was in a precarious situation, I guess, but he was outside, and we were like, well, we look after him then. And she'd been giving him shit for ages, and then just one day she accused him of drinking on his lunch, and he hadn't been. We'd been with him all lunch, and he hadn't been drinking. And she just like singled him out, said, right, well, and she fired him on the spot, and we all walked out. It was like Saturday night. Whole kitchen just left. Went next door and got smashed. And that felt really empowering. That was like, do you know what, I've slaved away in here, and I felt like I had no options, and I just had to do what I was told by somebody who didn't know what they were talking about, and I felt really powerless. And do you know what, I've just taken it back. And it was really like, I mean, what power, you know? I lost my job. It was rubbish, but just in that moment, I was like, yes, this is amazing. I can, you know, you can just take it back. There are always consequences, I think, for those transgressions of people taking power that isn't supposed to be theirs, I guess. And on like big state levels, you can only take power when there is the ability to fend off those consequences, those kind of reactionary consequences that kind of, the, you know, 21 armies coming in to tell you off, things like that. But like, I think it's much more difficult on a more personal level, because there is always a mechanism to kind of make you pay for those little bits of power that you try and take back. You know, we've given you votes, we've given you this, we've been so generous, and you still spit in our face like this by doing something very simple, very human, I think. Just kind of trying to expand into enough space to live. There was the repercussion that, you know, I suffered economic hardship because of that. I lost my job, I lost my income, just for trying to sort of take that power back from somebody, just on such a small scale. And yet there was the punishment. There was that you will play by these rules, or you will, well, you can starve. You will not be my problem. You will be, you know, you'll be somewhere else. And there's always this lie that you have the freedom to go elsewhere, and of course we don't. We're very sort of quite tightly corralled, and you know, by the gatekeeping of our means of life, You know, we need access to these certain things, shelter, food, blah, 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 blah. And these are all gate-kept by people who require money in order to do it, so we have to give of our body and time and space in order to access those things. So yeah, it's that kind of... There are punishments for stepping outside of those boundaries always, and they may not be visible. I guess the goal of any protest, by that definition, the goal of any protest is to set up camp in this space that you have occupied. In this space that you have occupied, this kind of place, dimension, plane, I don't know. But to make that transgression and to make that stick, to redefine where that corral is, I guess that is the goal of a protest. So to gather in the town square and to demand something and to have that demand met, that is a successful protest, right? To live as yourself, the self that you feel you are, and to continue to do that even when people might find it difficult to accept that, might oppose you doing that, and to continue to do it and to stake that out, and maybe for other people to be able to occupy that space too. That's a protest. That's a successful protest. And there will always, I guess, there will always be this pushback to try and push people back into this corral and onto this track. But I'd say a protest maybe backed up with the idea of resistance, which is another concept we could probably spend about an hour on. But yeah, I guess a successful protest is something that's, when that sticks, when that redefines those trackways, let's say.
I think there's a danger of protesting for the sake of protesting. It has to be part of a wider strategic aim. So you wouldn't just say you were protesting against homelessness. I'm sure you can have a protest about homelessness, but what you'd also need to be doing in that campaign, as I know people have done, is bring in the homeless community into the campaign, get trade unions involved in the campaign, and other political organisations, and that's how you start to build that weight, that mass to it, and then that's how it gets the ball rolling. But a protest isolated, just as an expression of anger, it's like how a riot doesn't necessarily achieve very much on its own, but when a riot has a political element to it, then it's not just a riot, it's an insurrection.
People who have power are... Well, power, it depends how it is. It's like, power is, like how you stratify it. Power is either people in government, people in media, people who have influence. Power is also the police officer at a march who can decide whether or not they're going to attack you. Like in Oldham, we have a very clear example. Like our MP at the time was, let's say, racially dubious when it comes to his politics, right. And was quick to blame, especially like Pakistani communities, for a problem which is widespread, and was, from my experience as somebody who has like got eyes and ears and like a brain between them, I would say this is a problem of capitalism. This is a problem of neoliberalism. This is much bigger than Asif and his family moving down the street. This is this is a problem of like economic relations. Now, after, and not to sound conspiratorial, just stating facts, that after the Oldham riots, the MP who was very vocal on stuff like that became the Minister for Immigration. And like it did, like as a reasonably like intelligent, politically aware like brown person, you couldn't see that in any other way than a bit of a slap in the face, and to tell you that a certain kind of power has entrenched itself, and that the narrative that they're going to be using is that that Britain should be like this homogenous culture, and like with an acceptance of empire has made it so you come over here, but if you're here, then you need to do what we say. Just 2 weeks ago, where a Facebook page had been set up impersonating me, saying that I hate white people, that I would encourage the killing of Jews, that we niggers need this, and this. And that is clearly by some butthurt, ignorant person who we can imagine the levels of melanin, who are saying that basically, this uppity nigger has no right to speak, and so that we need to do something about that. And that is this does sound hyperbolic, but this is like the 21st century lynch mob. This is what we do. It's like we decide that this is a thing, and we're going to jump on it because how dare he speak?
I've always been quite lucky, I suppose, to use a trendy term. I am quite privileged in a way. I haven't often experienced that kind of thing, but I know people who have experienced that kind of thing, and these people do tend to be people of colour, or women, or trans people, and that kind of thing. They experience much more violence than I do, just in the everyday. The police have always treated me reasonably, compared to even how other people have been treated on protests. Maybe I'm secretly a spy, that's what it is.
Well, maybe you just fit the description of the normality.
Well, exactly. I look and sound like a middle-class white man, so that, to be honest, means I kind of get left alone to do what I want, even though, I aspire to challenge the state of things as they are. As a socialist, I want to overturn the existing order of things. However, I get much more mileage out of it. It's much easier for me to do so than it is for other comrades to do.
When you're in a neighbourhood which is not necessarily like the nicest, but it's nicer than what you're supposed to be in, and the curtains twitch, or you notice that's an unusual amount of police officers that I've seen today. It is massively disempowering.
The majority of women that do feel that they can take it to court, it's not the crime that's on trial, it's them that's on trial, it's their respectability. And you can start doubting yourself as to whether you should have come out, or whether it did actually happen to you, or when it comes down to a consensus of if a woman was drunk, it's not rape. I think if you were drunk, you do start thinking, well, did I say this? Did I say that? Did I consent to it? And you're suddenly forced into a position where you think, oh, I am the villain in this situation, and that's emotional violence over you and over your body as well.
As somebody who doesn't automatically have a right to be in these spaces, whether that be because of my race, because of my class, because of my disability, that you often feel like you're in the dock, and you have to, and you're constantly fighting to go, I should actually be here, that is the reality of our existence, and we don't complain about it, because if you complain about it, you've got a chip on your shoulder.
I've often felt powerless, I guess, but when I think about it, in none of those situations was I truly powerless. Like, there were always, there's always an option. Or you would hope there was always an option. I guess there is truly no more miserable state than being actually powerless, than having absolutely no agency whatsoever. Which, thankfully, I don't think I've ever found myself in that situation. But I mean, there is always. Suicide is an option. You know, that's a kind of a power. It's one that you hope nobody would ever have to exercise. But if you can retain things like that, you can retain a sort of power. Obviously, you'd hope you'd have more options, I guess. But there's that kind of. While your options may not always be apparent, or while they may be possibly too difficult to consider at that point, there will always be, say, economically in a workplace, there will always be the option of organising, I guess, even though that might seem like a Herculean task. There's just one of you and no one else is that into it, and you'd have so much explaining to do, and just absolutely starting from 101 with everybody in that workplace, and it would just seem like, how would I do this? How would I do this all on my own? But it is always, at least theoretically, an option.
Like, it takes a lot for me to be seen as a credible witness to my own experiences.
I suppose it's like how. I mean, a lot of it it's inheritance, isn't it? They inherit large amounts of money, and that gives them power. But the main thing that gives people power is capital. And that's what it boils down to. It's people's relationship to the means of production. So, economic power, obviously. Billionaires have a lot of power in society. Managers in very large corporations, directors, things like that, they have a lot of power in society. This is the power that we all know. We know these people exercise a lot of power. You see the way they can dance politicians along to their tune. But then, on a smaller scale, you can see that the different oppressions that we deal with. You see that there's even so you go to the pub with your mates, you can see that sometimes if you're there with female friends and that kind of thing, they can get talked over by louder male friends. That's another question of power. That's patriarchy, and all that kind of thing. It's something that's hidden. There's not much education about it at all. I don't think the different power structures that we exist in. I mean, I'm sure there's things that I do. There's things that I experience, and I don't even know that I'm being affected by these relationships, these power structures. But I think, as a message of hope, I suppose, there is an incredible amount of power in the ordinary person, me and you, whoever, anyone out there. The people stuck at the bottom of the pile, the majority, the proletariat, to put an old word into use. We have an incredible amount of power, we just don't know it. And it can be used and utilised in the correct way.